So I'm going to try and do a project where I combine my love of mystical, magical fairies and also the spookiness of Halloween. So I'm going to try and make a Halloween fairy garden. So to do this, you're going to need a pot. Now, I kind of went for a medium size pot. You will also need a medium size plant pot as well. It doesn't matter if these plant pots are slightly damaged or anything because they're going to be pretty much completely covered. Now, the only pot that won't be covered is the very tiny miniature pot. So also, you need to have some kind of plant to go in here. Now, you can either go for something synthetic, but what I went for was a little cactus, or you could say like maybe some type of succulent, because those are so easy to look after and they don't really need much water at all. You will also need some little ornaments, so I've got little toadstools, and of course I've got some pumpkins and also a little black cat and a few other things which I picked up in like a fairy store, which is this tiny little wheelbarrow. Now, you will need some kind of a modelling clay. I usually use this one, which is called DAS or DAS. It's mainly all in a different language, but I get it from my local works. But really, any type of like air drying clay, and I'm sure you could do this with a polymer clay, which is the type of clay you cook, will work perfectly. You may also need some cardboard as well. I use cardboard just to kind of strengthen some things. Now, although I'm going to be using this like medium size one to aid with the shape of my house, I am probably going to be using tin foil as well, so you may possibly need tin foil to make this. You may also want to use kind of decorative tape just to spice things up a bit, and along with the decorative tape, which you can get really cheap, I think you can get 3 for £1 in Poundland, you may also want to get some kind of mystical stickers. So I have these star stickers. These are actually left over from when I was on school placement, but you know, we can always use them for other things. So it completely depends on your preference, but I also use little tools when I am kind of moulding things out of clay, because sometimes our hands can't quite make those tiny little details. And then once the clay is done, you're going to need paint brushes. I love using kind of thicker ones when I've got to do like large areas, and then these thinner kind of more detailed brushes are an absolute lifesaver. And to do this, I always use acrylic paints. You can pick up around 12 acrylic paints for I think £3 in the works, and they work amazingly, and you don't really need that much. Other things you could use are tiny little potion bottles. I also have like a selection of various different beads and sequins and things, which I'm not really sure whereabouts I'm going to put them yet, but I'm sure I will find something to do with them. And also, to finish it off, because of course it is a fairy house, you may need a little bit of glitter. As for how I'm going to present this, I'm going to use like a plant tray, you know, the kind of saucer that you put under a plant pot, just to kind of keep everything in one place, because I am also planning to get a few kind of stones and bits of soil from the garden as well, so I want this to look realistic, but honestly I don't want to make a massive mess. So to begin with, I cleaned the pots, I cleaned my area, and I took off all of my rings because this clay can really easily get stuck in your jewellery. So to begin with, I wanted to strengthen my design, so I drew around the outside of the pot on the cardboard and cut it out. Now I am planning to make the roof as such of the house to look like a witch's hat. So I didn't want it to cave in the middle, so I'm using this cardboard just to give it a bit more strength, but then I am ultimately covering it over in clay because the clay does stick better to other bits of clay, whereas it doesn't stick as fantastically to cardboard. Now I am making the top like a witch's hat, so I'm going to start with the brim. So I made like a sausage and basically pulled it out and blended it together to make the rim. Now I was trying to think of a way of strengthening this but making it still kind of look like a house as such, so I decided to get little triangles and shove it underneath the brim of the hat. Now you don't really see this detail that much, but it kind of gives it that almost sort of house, realistic house look. And then I did feel like the brim needed to be a bit thicker, so I made another sausage of clay, squished it on there, and it made it kind of double the thickness. Now I'm going to be using the middle-sized pot to help with the structure at the top. Now I did actually end up using tin foil to get that kind of witch hat shape, and that's just because I felt it wasn't necessary to use so much clay when you can just kind of cover up the tin foil with a very thin layer of clay, and it actually worked really nicely, and it meant I could really get that shape that I was after. So once I'd kind of got these two pieces, I needed to join them together. So again, I'm going with my approach of making sausages of clay and then just squishing them together. Now, what I did find is that this clay did get sort of dry because it is an air drying clay. So at points I did actually need to put a little bit of water just to make it a bit softer and easier to blend. So I made a triangle at the front because I wanted this to be kind of the entrance of the house. I wanted it to kind of stick out, be a little bit more grand. And then I did also want to make a window as well because I felt like it needed a few other little details, not just a doorway. So I wanted to put like a kind of ribbon around the house. So again, I made a sausage, but this time I squished it before I put it on there, and I put it on there quite rough, and I felt like it gave it that kind of rim look. And then to make the creases in the hat, I actually just shoved a tool in there and pushed it in one direction, and it made it kind of fold and bulge, which kind of gave it that fabric look. So then I decided to start on the doorway. So I was going for a relatively simple doorway. I wanted the door to be in almost coffin shape, but I still didn't want it to be like too detailed. I didn't want it to be in your face coffin shaped. But with the door, I actually just kind of made the kind of top of it, and I blended the rest down into the actual pot because I felt, again, I did not need to use that excess amount of clay, and I wanted the sides of the doorway to stick out quite a lot. So I then kind of went in, added a bit of texture, added a few more details such as the kind of strips that go along the windows, and I decided I wanted to put a bat on here because of course it needs to have a bat. So I made a tiny little bat and I stuck it to the window at the top. Originally I was going to stick it on the door, but it was slightly too big and there was no way I was going through making that all again. I did make a little door knocker though for the door and a handle. So to dry this clay, it is an air drying clay, but I find if you put it in the airing cupboard, and I actually left mine for around 12 hours, but some clays vary in times that they take to dry, but I left mine in 12 for like 12 hours and it was fine, and it was all nice and dry when I took it out. But if you're using a polymer clay, for example, you could cook this and it will be completely dry within, say, 5 minutes. So it depends what clay you're using. So I decided to paint this with an acrylic paint. I began by doing the main part, which is the hat. I just did this with a black layer of acrylic paint to start with, and when I paint large surfaces, what I tend to do is I do it quite rough, and then I go back and fill in the tiny little details I've missed out, just because I like to get the bulk of the area done, and then I can worry about the little bits of white. You'll see throughout this I do constantly go back and fill in tiny bits of white. So I made the actual kind of ribbony bit red, and when I got red on the black, I literally just put another black layer on top with the other black acrylic paint. Now I did find that the red and the black started to mix, so I did just leave this to dry for a little while. I decided to do like the main features of the house in green. I felt like this was like a relatively spooky colour, but then I still wanted to have that kind of mystical, natural look of a fairy house. You'll also see that I put a little bit of black on the bat. Again, I was just filling the bulk of the black, and then I went back and did all the details of the bat a bit later on. So once I had done all the green, I then went back to the hat because the black had dried and I wanted to give it a kind of bluey black sort of look. So I added a layer of blue on top of the black. I then went in and did the yellow for the windows, and as I said, I went back and did all the little black details of the bat, and I wanted to have kind of a more realistic look by adding more like wood colours in, so like browns. So I made the kind of insides of the windows and that cross in the window brown. And then I did the same for the little window above the door, and also I just made the door brown. I was going to do this in red, but I felt like it would kind of lose that natural sort of fairy look. And in fact, it probably looks more like a coffin since it is in a brown colour. As you'll see, I'm just going back now and adding little details where I'm noticing little white bits which have kind of popped up now that it's dried. So I started to add some smaller details like the fangs and the eyes of the bat, which I do go back and finish the eyes because they just needed to dry for a little bit. I added some black lines into the brown wood just to kind of give it that more natural looking wood colour. I painted the door handle black, and then I added a little orange circle, which I'll see what that turns into, and also the house number 13. I was weighing up between 13 and 56, but I felt like I would go for 13 since it was meant to be like a spooky feel. And then I added some varying different colours to the actual base of the house just to give it a more realistic look, and drawn some really kind of almost cartoon style bricks. And to kind of finish it off, I went in and filled those little triangles underneath with a dark brown, just so that there was no sort of white bits left. I then went into the final details. I turned that little orange dot into a pumpkin and added a little green stalk, which was super cute. And then it was pretty much done, so I just left it for a while to dry before I started assembling my fairy garden. Acrylic paint really doesn't take that long to dry. It was pretty much dry when I finished, but I just wanted to make sure it was completely dry. So I got my kind of little base, I filled it with dirt from the garden and put a few kind of pebbles and stones around the outside. I wanted it to kind of look sort of like a realistic garden in a way. I decorated this little pot with some sticky fabric tape, which is amazing. I absolutely love this tape. I placed my cat on the top, my pumpkin in the garden, and I added a few little stars, which I had, these are just regular stickers I had left from school placement, but I thought it would give it a little bit more of that kind of magical look. I then added another little pumpkin which I found, and some dried moss. Dried moss is my favourite thing to work with. It will instantly make anything look enchanted, and I just love it. It's so easy to work with. So I just shoved that down the side and added in the little wheelbarrow. So I wanted to make a path, so I just literally used some little silver beads I got from the works and some black sequins, and it made a cute little fairy path which went up to the door, which I was really pleased with. And then finally, because this is meant to be magical, I added some little glitter which sort of looks a bit like fairy dust, and I did kind of go for gold because I felt like it kind of gave it an autumny feel. And then I was pretty much done with my fairy garden, and I was really pleased with the way it looked. And I thought, just to finish it off, I'd add some of the same sticky fabric tape around the outside of there. This tape is so good. It's like a sellotape, but it's actually fabric, and this one is actually covered in these tiny little, I think they're meant to be gold flowers, but to me they look like stars because they have got 5 petals, and it's just so lovely. I think after making this, although I still have loads left, I'm probably going to go back to Poundland and buy some more, just because I feel like it completely finished off this piece and kind of brought it all together. So that is my fairy garden, and I am so pleased with how it turned out. It's really easy to kind of move around because it is in that dish, and it definitely has the kind of spooky effect that I was going for, but at the same time it kind of looks cute and dinky and fairy and enchanted. I think I'm probably going to try and make a few more of these houses. I would like to see which other ones I could come up with, and it was so easy and cheap to make just because I have so many flower pots and things hanging around anyway. And then the clay itself was pretty cheap. As I said, you could probably do this with a polymer clay and get a lot more detail, but for a very quick and cheap craft, I did this within like a 24-hour period. It's like a very easy and simple project to do, and I think it looks pretty effective. So if any of you do decide to make any fairy houses, please do let me know, because I love seeing what you guys create. So thank you for watching. If you do have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If it's sunny where you are, I hope you're enjoying the shade, and I'll see you next time. Bye!